Are you legally at risk to sexual harassment claims? Or is someone on your team possibly behaving in an inappropriate manner, and are you legally protected? Let's jump into this week's episode to find out. Hey everyone, this is Corey Sterling from the Conscious Counsel podcast. I'm super excited that you're here with me and that we get to go on this journey of exploring various legal issues that will apply to health and wellness entrepreneurs. And this week's topic is a very, very serious one, and that is about sexual harassment in the workplace or in your studio. The impetus for this episode and recording this particular episode was going through a really, really challenging experience with one of my clients this past week where someone at their studio alleged that they had been sexually harassed. And unfortunately, I've been through that situation a couple of times as a lawyer working as counsel for different studio owners or business owners. And to me, it makes sense for us to take a little bit of time in this week's episode to talk about what the issues are, but not specifically what sexual harassment is, but from a legal strategical standpoint, how can you be prepared and how can your business be legally prepared in the event that there's some allegation that comes against you? So there's a couple of points that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to tell the story about what I went through last week, and then I'm going to bring it all together so that it makes sense for you. Sexual harassment is something that's extremely serious, and that anytime that I'm involved in anything that's related to it, the threshold of how serious we have to take things gets elevated. And also, it's a very, very, very tricky area of law and always a very challenging situation, because a lot of the times it's one person's word against another person's word. And I think that adds an extra layer of complexity to all of the elements that go into sexual harassment. But legally, I want to just talk about the major issues that you have as an owner of a business. So, for example, if you have a studio and you're not there all of the time, you've got a full schedule, classes are taking place, maybe you hire someone new who you don't know so well, but you thought was going to be great, or anything like that, and they could do something that gets misinterpreted or misunderstood, or they could make a guest at your studio feel uncomfortable, or they could say or do something inappropriate. There's so many different ways that this can manifest, which just makes it tricky. And so I want to talk about the legal things that you're going to need to think about and address. So the first is consent. Waivers of liability. If there's going to be any physical touching from an instructor to a participant, there has to be consent in there. I know that there are these consent cards that a lot of yoga studios will have where people can choose to put it face up or face down. Sometimes at the start of class, teachers will say, hey, if you do not want any hands-on physical adjustments, raise your hand, and someone will. All of that is really, really important to communicate that before you touch anyone. What's also really important is that the waiver of liability explicitly states consent for physical touch. So first and foremost, that's the thing that's always going to happen. The second thing is, both for your membership agreement and for your independent contractor or employee agreement, you need to have particular procedures and situations outlined of what happens in the event that someone alleges or feels that they were sexually harassed. And normally that will be a set and series of procedures where, okay, in the event that something happens, please let our staff become aware. The staff become aware, they file a report, they take all the details. If anyone else was present, you need to get statements from those people about what they saw and how they saw it. And I know that in the moment, it doesn't seem like that's what's so important to do, but I've had sexual harassment allegations against my clients that we were able to combat appropriately because they were false. And it was from the testimony of other people who were in the class at the same time. So you always want to gather reports, but most importantly, but for you as a business owner, you need to show that there's a system and that there's a procedure in place to deal with that. Because in the event, and this is also another area of sexual harassment that's really, really challenging, is in the event someone makes an allegation or says, hey, this is what someone did to me, and you do not deal with it or handle it appropriately, and showing that you take it very, very seriously, you will be deemed negligent and you'll be responsible as well. So as a studio owner, when it comes to the studio membership agreement or, a service agreement with your clients, you want to include, God forbid, in the event there's a situation that makes you feel uncomfortable, please let us know immediately. We'll contact the relevant authorities. We'll take a statement, all these sorts of things. The waiver of liability needs to include something on consent. And then for your employee or independent contractor agreements, even though it's so obvious, you have to put in writing something that says, You will not touch anyone without their permission. You will not say anything inappropriate that would offend someone. You will not put someone in a situation where they might feel uncomfortable in working with you, or you're not allowed to cross any boundaries. The reason why you need to have this as the studio owner and the business owner is because in the event that you have a rogue contractor and employee who does something wildly inappropriate, you have to be able to show, okay, cool, I foresaw this potentially happening. I had everyone who works with me sign a contract saying they're not going to do it. We have policies at our studio saying that you're not allowed to do these particular things. And if this person did it on their own, okay, it's terrible, it's awful, we're going to deal with it, we'll speak to the relevant authorities. Then you've shown that you've done everything that you can. When I'm working with clients who either have generic agreements or things that are not industry specific about physical consent or whatever's relevant in an employee handbook or a independent contractor agreement, it definitely can come up that if someone's alleging harassment, they would say, hey, show me the policies that your studio has in place to show that you take care of this seriously. And when you don't have that, and I've been in situations where I don't have that, as the lawyer and as the studio owner, it's very, very difficult because you're negligent. You're putting your clients and your community in potentially vulnerable situations. And so you have to make sure that you're protecting them and that also that you can show that you're protecting them. That's what law is really about. The law is really about having the agreements be able to support your position and show that you take these things seriously. So for this week's story, what happened, it's a studio that I'm working with in Florida. It's a yoga studio, and there are 3 owners who are each active owners in the business. There's a studio manager and there's a bunch of employees. The studio manager had brought up to one of the owners that they felt that they were sexually harassed or taken advantage of by one of the other owners who was a male. So the studio manager's female. There are 2 male owners and 1 female owner. So I get this call from my client who's very, very upset. And this is his business partner. The allegations are made against him. I don't need to talk about any of the details of that situation, but what I want to share with you is, like, as a lawyer, how I approach it, right? So the first thing I said was, do you have any policies in your operating agreement as owners where you outline what the appropriate context or environment to speak with your workers are? So as an example, in this particular situation, the studio manager who was alleging that she was sexually harassed was in an environment outside of the workplace with this other owner. So they were somewhere else in a off-site location having a work meeting, and certainly that contributed to the feelings that she had and whatever happened. And again, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened, but for me, what I said was, okay, cool. Well, first thing is you need to come up with a policy that, firstly, anytime any of the owners speak with the staff, another one of the owners should be present as well. And secondly, all meetings related to the team need to take place on site. So you just avoid that. And that's something that everyone who's listening, you can sort of take that stuff and apply it. But the other issue around the situation was there was nothing in the employee agreement or in the employee handbook relating to how owners behave with each other. So for example, this owner wanted to kick the third owner out of the business, but they didn't have a proper operating agreement that said, if you do something to harm the studio, like put yourself in a situation where someone can allege sexual harassment against you, the other 2 owners can buy you out and force you to leave. They're not able to do that. But even with the studio manager, she didn't have a procedure to follow. Like, she wasn't able to file a complaint with HR and follow it up and make sure that it got through the correct process that it had to go through. And for me, it's an example of something that's so sad, can be so traumatizing for people, and just put so many different people at risk in so many different ways. And so when it comes to sexual harassment in the workplace, specifically in health and wellness, studios and dynamics with owners and staff members, you want all of your procedures and policies to be in writing. So whether that's consent for the waiver of liability, whether it's a procedure to let people know appropriate behavior and guidelines to file a report if they're a member of your studio or if they're one of your clients, or for an employee handbook or independent contractor agreement, how you're expected to behave, what's inappropriate, what happens if you behave inappropriately. And then fourthly, for owners of a company to be able to take reasonable action if they no longer want someone on their ownership team based on their behavior. So it's a very, very sad and challenging area to work in. Other examples that I've had that I'm not going to jump into today, but other places where I've seen this have been students alleging that they were harassed by a teacher, teachers alleging they were sexually harassed by students, typically with a male student and a female teacher. That's the dynamic. And so it can come up in a lot of different ways. And it's an area that we take really seriously, and that I hope that this information has been helpful to you and that you're able to consider how you can apply it. And if there's any support that you need included in the show notes for this episode, we're going to put a link to book a call with anyone from Conscious Counsel if you have some questions, how to be set up properly, how to make sure that your business has all of the legal requirements to make sure you're honoring your community and your staff and your fellow owners. We'll be happy to support you. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and click subscribe and like, and I'm excited to prepare some more content for us together in the future. Ciao.